Hello, everyone. I know many of you, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Kitt Patten, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to this poetry book release reading featuring Lana Hechtman Ayers with her latest book, Beautiful, When All Else Fails. She is joined by renowned Welsh poet Samantha Wynne-Rhydderch, reading poems from several of her published works. This reading will be a call and response. Lana will start by reading one poem, and Samantha will answer that poem with a poem that follows in the theme of that poem, or the idea of that, the feel of that poem. And then she'll read one of her own, and Lana will answer that poem with one of her poems, and so on. It's going to be an amazing interplay of words, and I know we all want to get to it, but first, a little housekeeping. If you're not already muted, please mute and stay muted during the reading. Feel free to express yourself with the Zoom reactions or by writing comments in the chat. Also, just to free up bandwidth and ensure a smooth reading, they're going to be spotlighted anyway. We ask that you go off video during their reading just to free up bandwidth. After the reading, we can all rejoin on video for the Q&A. Please do note your questions while Lana and Samantha read. And I will now let you know about our poets if you don't already know everything about these amazing women. Cat Mama, Dog Mama, Sky Watcher, recovering coffee addict, former New Yorker, Lana Hechtman Ayers writes in a room over her garage, as you can see. Her work appears in such places as Rattle, The London Reader, Peregrine, The MacGuffin, and Verse Daily. Author of 8 full-length poetry collections, the most recent are When All Else Fails and Overtures, which is coming out in August. Next year, her 9th collection, The Autobiography of Rain, will be released by Fernwood Press. Lana also delves into romantic time travel fiction and mystery. She leads generative writing workshops in the Amherst method, which are fantastic, helps poets assemble their own collections, facilitates a Zoom poetry group, and manages 3 small poetry presses where she's fostered over 100 books into the world. Somehow, Lana also spends entirely too many hours watching HGTV and solving cryptograms with her spouse in Newport, Oregon, a town famous for its barking sea lions. Reading with her is Samantha Wynne-Rhydderch, the author of Banjo, Not in These Shoes, and Rock Climbing in Silk. She has been shortlisted for the Michael Marks Award, the Roland Matthews Prize, and Wales Book of the Year in 2009, and highly commended twice in the Forward Prizes. Her works have appeared in the Poetry Review, the Financial Times, Granta, New Welsh Review, Planet, Poetry London, and Poetry Wales, and has been broadcast on BBC Radio 3. In 2012, Samantha was Leva Hume Writer-in-Residence at the National Wool Museum, and in 2014, she held a residency at the Dylan Thomas Boathouse to mark the centenary of the poet's birth. In 2015, she won an Arts Council Creative Wales Award. In 2022, Samantha was awarded a PhD in creative writing from the University of Wales, Trinity St. David. Samantha is writing her next collection, and somehow she also finds time to rewild a field on the West Wales coast. So, now we will start what we've been waiting for. Lana?
Thank you so much, Kitt, for the introduction. I am just so honored to have all of you here. I mean, it's a delight to have so many faces I know and some faces I don't know, and I hope will become friends of poetry in the future. And the biggest honor is to read with Samantha. She is a poet whose work I have admired and I respect so highly. And it is such a delight to be here and have my voice alongside her voice in these wonderful poems that she will read for us today. So
Thank you, Lana.
Thank you. My first poem has a short epigraph. My River Waits Reply, Emily Dickinson. And the poem is called My River Runs. It's the first poem in the collection. Born to basement rivers after rainstorm, to a Charlie Brown rose bush that teetered on a single thorned bough, and the one bud a season that never opened. Born to mother's word, bus rides with multiple transfers, escape being more waiting and wrecked umbrellas than flight. Born to wide feet, wearing men's boots, treading gait free of grace. Born to Neruda's short love and long remembering. Born to the door ajar that oceans are. Born to if only and why must. To discover the Atlantic's pulse in my throat, the Acacia forest beneath my rib cage. Born to trip, to topple, to tumble. Born to be the sky's reporter, mood ring for the rain. To be a lap for pause, a map of bejeweled weariness. To memorize the changing light. Born to curl hand around pen and ride the whitewater rapids of poetry. No life jacket required.
So I'm going to follow that lovely poem, which is a kind of Ars Poetica, really, I think, Lana. I'm going to follow that with two poems from my collection, Banjo, and I'll talk more about the title during the discussion and the Q&A. And the first poem that I'm going to read is called Vive la Résistance. I lived in France for nearly 3 years, and I've always been fascinated by the French resistance. It was on such a night as this that I floated like a debutante into the arms of a cornfield outside Rouen, my parachute silk streaming into a bridal train adorning the corn. And for the first time, I felt the full weight of what it must be to be a woman, always dragging a dress through obtuse fields. So I unharnessed myself from the lot, rolled up my folds and ran off to the lich gate of Sainte-Marie-du-Chêne, where I awaited an assignation with a Monsieur Le Fat, who passed me a map and a cigarette packet, which I followed to a farm to be met by a frowning chap in breeches, who unhooked the door of a barn where his daughter was hitching up a bed for me in linsey-woolsey. At the altar, I hovered between doubts and belief until she glided down the aisle stitched into my parachute, and for a second we soared above the priest, the spire, the higgledy fields, the two of us threaded together in the silks that had saved me, which I later unbuttoned, and she has since trapped in the attic in case one day they take off without us. And the second poem that I'm going to read from the same collection is called Sharing Your Bed. My mother died nearly 30 years ago when I was quite young, and this poem really recounts what it felt like to have those last few hours with her, in which I got into bed beside her so that I could just spend as much time as possible with her. All night, the morning was coming, like the clock said it would. To make the darkness last, I held your right hand tight. You won't remember the weight of my fingers in yours. As the tocks ticked by, you were losing your grip, crisscrossing in your dream the string road to Loch Ranza, blonde as your hair rivering down the pillow. Above your bed, the red boat rocked back and forth, beside the bridge in the painting you'd loosened with water and brushes years ago. And I knew, because the clock told me so, that morning was coming and you would have to go. I thought of macrame as you twisted your hands in mine, of the twine and hemp you'd pull into reverse half hitches. All night I plaited my fingers into yours like a pagoda knot to pull you through the morphine sleep, to keep you under this roof. You breathed and breathed, until by dawn you had no more breaths to weave, no more cords to tauten, and I, your child, woke beside you, holding a lattice of stiff fingers.
And this is my poem in response. It's a mother poem as well, but a little bit different theme. It's called The Slap. I was being dragged behind my mother, her hand a tight leash, the sun checkerboarded by maple trees above our heads, green leaves exotic as parrot wings, with undersides a secret treasure of silver, flapping in the breeze that tickled my bare arms, and from somewhere nearby, an ice cream truck playing its three-note song. The scent of lilacs mingled with roses, the old-fashioned single-petal kind, everything warm and bright. I stretched to see the lovely lacework of blue sky peeking through, so that I hardly noticed that the tugging at my wrist had stopped. I stumbled over my mother's toes, she stock still facing me, her hands planted on her waist. She stared down from behind dark sunglasses, eyes invisible, mouth a red gash. And before I could say, "Sorry, Mama," she slapped me on the cheek hard, hard as that time with the frying pan. As tears exploded from my eyes, a single leaf let loose from a lower branch. And through my blurred vision, I watched it turn over and over and over, drift down toward me, slowly, like a fairy or an angel. And a voice whispered inside my head that said, this is poetry. And this next one is kind of a childhood summation, I guess you'd say. It's called Grown Up Already. Never again the blue stain of berries all over my mouth, hands, t-shirt, plucked from the wild bushes on my bubby's expansive acreage in Rock Hill, New York. Never again the rattling sound of rats' toenails in the middle of the night, my neighbor Nick's concrete patio situated under my bedroom window, a whole crew of them cleanup team for his beer blast blowouts. Never again the smell of old Coney Island, sea brine, sweltering, hot dogs, and the wheel grease of the roller coaster I wanted to ride so badly, but was never this high. Never again grasping a Malibu Barbie doll by her knees and bobbing her stilettoed feet across the redwood picnic table to my best friend Joanne's handsome Ken doll and his plastic plastered hair. Never again the chorus of fatso, fatso, fatso down the chemical green hallways of PS 207 in Queens, New York, as I fled the lunchroom after trying to eat my Hydrox cookies in secret under the table. Never again my grandma Sarah's Johnson & Johnson baby powdered hugs, her Vaselined hands, her sablefish and cream cheese sandwiches on rye, bribes so I would read my poems to her. Never again the sound of the table saw kicking up sweet-scented confetti as my father pushed board after board through to the perfect cuts that would assemble to become my first bookcase. Never again my secret friend, the moon, in her nest amidst forsythia shrubs run amok, her cool-headed light a voice of reason and solace. Never again the lopsided geometry of the stars above my childhood backyard, raising their ebony velvet umbrella over me.
So one of the things that I can sense coming through in both our poems so far, Lana, is the sense of time, the passing of time, and of course the writing a poem for me is a way of trying to kind of freeze time, as it were, freeze time in words. And I recently wrote, I never thought I would write a poem actually called Time, but I have actually finally got around to doing that. And one that was published in this anthology, which is called Gorwelion, a Welsh word meaning shared horizons. And this poem is a ghazal. I think it may even be one of the first ghazals that I wrote. Time. On occasions, it feels compressed, does time, at others dragging its feet one at a time. It's a squeeze box bookended by two hands, neither of them mine, not that I was aware at the time. For a minute, the player holds the moment open so the box can release each syllable at the allotted time. Like the voices of ghosts stuck in its throat, the concertina contains a choir which will sing if we all beat time. Time seems a staircase we sled down as children on a mattress or bounded up like deer two at a time. We do not want to think about the time we may descend on a stretcher in someone else's time. Even if you forget to wind the clock or break its hands, it will still keep passing behind your back in no time. Or else it's a slinky which holds its spirals close till one touch gives it permission to defy time. One day it lands at your feet in a neat coil. Someone else will have to set it going. You're out of time. You can't cajole it, distract it, or wind it up. Hours have their own momentum, and that gets me every time. Fast forward to a night in November when our house slipped off the cliff and we got out just in time. As if the house had tripped, we knew it would. Coastal erosion is just a matter of time. For years, the sundial in the garden pointed to the sea. Then it started accusing the sky, like it was outside time. Weird how the Montbretia still rush out every spring at the spot where our back door was, even after all this time. So there you have it. Good to see you, and thank you for the pint, Sam. Got to go. They've just called time. My second poem by way of response is well, it sort of connects back to my mother, who was a painter. This poem is called Portrait. So it's not about her, and it's not about anything that she painted. It's actually about a set of portraits. So I don't know whether you know about the portraits from the National Gallery. A lot of paintings from the National Gallery were evacuated to a quarry called Manod Quarry in Blaenau Ffestiniog during the Second World War. And this poem looks at what happened to the huge portrait of King Charles I on horseback. And at the end of the poem, there's a reference to Duchess's Bach, which is a size of slate. And this poem was published in an anthology called The Slate Sea. Portrait. They say it scraped the apex of the bridge on all three rehearsals to evacuate the National Gallery to a hollow mountain north of Blaenau. But on that September day in 1941, Charles I on horseback rode by in a canted transit case with 3/4 of an inch to spare once the boys had lowered the road. It's known the king was barely 5 feet tall. Astride a stallion in an imposing frame, and with fields of English oaks bowing down for miles behind, which of us would have cleared Ffestiniog Bridge unless the driver had deflated all the tyres? The other Van Dycks, plus 19 Rembrandts and the crown jewels, came by train as far as Bangor, then disguised in vans delivering chocolate to a disused mine. They stayed on display for 4 years, a hidden exhibition whose lights blazed all day, all night throughout the blackout, while in the quarry next door, men with torches cut pages of slate into empresses, broad countesses, wide ladies, and Duchesses Bach, like some family of royal women who roofed the world by size.
This poem is a response to art poem. Most of you, I'm sure, know that MoMA refers to the Museum of Modern Art, which is in New York, and that's the first line of the poem. This is called Starry Night. At MoMA in New York at 18, I discovered Van Gogh's Starry Night. So up close, I stood after the security guard walked by. I smelled the century between us and heard the cry of wet paint long since dried. I had no context for the tortured life of a man, a culture and religion apart. Had no knowledge of the sanitarium from whence the scene arose. But in that moment, I felt Van Gogh as a soul twin, one who understood the world is never still, impending darkness and the cacophony of exploding light engaged in a fight for domination. His cypress tree like a sword of doctrine piercing the fabric of time. I have never been at home anywhere but in that painting, or else in the rain where drops become my shroud, my sanctuary, song without lyrics. Whoever knows what they were born for is truly fortunate. I scribble in notebook after notebook as if to clear the way by making it muddier. I want to know it matters, any of it. Earth, humanity, a few humans in particular, perhaps even myself. Alone in my apartment, looking out, the stars like drops of rain glistening on the window panes of the cosmos, I've come to believe, by way of pain and a singular painting, that if love is the answer, no question matters more than any other. This next poem is kind of about being a young adult, and there's someone in the audience who will recognize this experience, having been there. However, the names have been altered to protect the innocent or the guilty. This is called Entered My Body with Light. A camping trip. My first, having grown up in a city family for whom nature meant rest stops off I-5. This trip with 3 others, all males, city college mates, Jed, Glenn, Michael. I wasn't dating any of them, nor did I want to, but 2 tents meant I was to share with one of them. And truthfully, I didn't care which. Sex, not even a consideration. Having lost my virginity a year earlier to a boy who stained my grandmother's heirloom lace tablecloth, wiping my hymen blood off his hands. This trip was my first venture far away from home for a weekend not spent with grandparents or aunts. I didn't know anything. Not how to prepare the ground, not how to raise the tent, not how to start a fire with sticks, a trick akin to miracle. The air was sticky, and I didn't care my hair poofed in funny directions, hadn't carted along my purse larger than some New York City apartments, nor my usual 5 shades of eyeshadow, mascara, lip gloss, not even a compact mirror. I wasn't there to attract anyone but myself, to the trees, to the river, to a night sky so dark it overflowed stars. I didn't care what I wore or pack more than underwear, t-shirts, a sweater. That sweltering Sunday, we decided to wade into the Neversink River to cool off. I thought nothing of peeling down to my white t-shirt and underwear. Upon jumping into the river, I understood what Christians called baptism. Cold, clean, clear. I felt it to my soul. The rush of life force entered me. I knew I could be anything, do anything. The power of simply being, a force of nature. Your lips are turning blue, Glenn shouted over the splashes we all made. Michael butterfly striked over and swam me along to dry land, his body wrapped around me like a towel. As I shivered on shore, dead gawking at me, I felt the nakedness of being in wet, white clothing. Reduced to a mere girl once more, the light inside me flickered and fled.
So I'm going to read two poems which partially pick up on some of the things that you were talking about, Lana. The first one is called Climbing Helvellyn, and so it's which is a mountain in the Lake District in the north of England, and it comes from my little collection Ling Di Long, which is a Welsh phrase that means to dilly-dally or to walk in a way in which you're kind of mindfully walking, I suppose, and observing things. Climbing Helvellyn. 10 years from now, the path will look the same, conceal the same old rocks lying in wait for the newest ingenues. It's us who will have changed, morphed from stags to men with mortgages, yet unsure how, escaping from a feeling we can't now name and couldn't gauge the weight of the day we bounded up Helvellyn, camouflaged in tutus and pink antlers, bantering at the glances of those heading back to bills shouting from dressers to sheds that needed creosoting. Not for us. Oh no, we had it all in the bag. Vodka and Galaxy bars and all the blondes of England to come. At the summit, 10 women on a checkered rug, staring at how far they'd travelled, had just begun to pass round cling-filmed sandwiches as if they were transparent presents and point little silver flasks like wands at mountains still to climb when we fizzed up with, "Hello girls, having a party?" "Kind of," they nodded. "We're a support group. We're widowed under 40. The second poem that I'm going to read from this little collection is called Weather Forecast, and it's got rain in the first line, but it's I remember writing it during a course that I did with a wonderful poet and playwright, Kate O'Reilly, who is here in the audience this evening, and I'd like to dedicate this poem to her because without that workshop, I wouldn't have written this poem. Weather Forecast. She wants to go outside, bow to the rain's applause. Funny she can't stop him going outdoors when it's about to pour in his Austrian breeches and a feather in his hat. How come they're never in at the same time? In her guts, she knows she's stuck in a plywood chalet 4 centimetres by 6 above a gas fire that the shutters she asked him to fix last year still don't close. Given the choice, she'd go back inside, but the sun's still out and this is her role, to smile and swing through the arch with her feet neatly nailed to a plinth, the other end of which is yoked to him indoors. She'd rather be a cuckoo tied to a wire, out on the hour, every hour. Now that's a one-bird job. At least you get to open your mouth and sing.
And this is my response to that poem. It's about disappointment, a little bit about weather. It's written after a poem called Miracle by Manuel Iris. And my poem is called When I Was Just About to Tell You I Love You. At that moment, the maple trees saluted the wind. The moon howled its silver light over the valley. My fingers trembled, jittery as moth wings. You sighed. Your breath in the chill air sent up a signal cloud I couldn't decode. My hand grazed yours as we leaned back against the side panel of your pickup, craned our necks toward the forever of cosmos, awaiting the apogee bloom of planet Mars, like a single rosebud in the ebony vase of sky. I wondered if you could hear my heart's music, frenzied drumming of uncertain melody. All of a sudden, you grabbed my wrist, directed my hand to the north like an arrow. A shooting star, you shouted, as if I weren't just a kiss's breath away. And this next one, some of you were here earlier when we were talking about Samantha and I having met in a course with the poet Matthew Dickman. This was actually a poem that I wrote in that class, and it's a difficult poem to read. This is a poem that took me, I guess, over 20 years of my life to write. I've been trying to write this about this experience for a very long time, about my father, and so I finally was able to do it with Matthew's help. It's called, I Never Thought to Lie Down with My Father. But that July afternoon, I held him as one might a lover, his body half the weight it had been, all cancer. Sun beamed dust dancers through the transom. A fan fussed back and forth, billowing swampy air. My fingers grazed the prickly scar above his left ear, shadowy bristle, pretending hair might again grow there. Where once was muscle and sweat, folds of emptied flesh. The bedspreads embroidered roses, scentless impostors. I lay in my mother's place, face to face with Daddy, shivery, cold, sobbing, I'm not ready to go, so much left. Everywhere he was fragile, my lips warmed his waxy skin, while a flip clock clicked softly from the bedstead, spun red-lit rectangles of white numerals, as if a train station timetable reporting departures, arrivals.
So this is my poem responding to that, Lana. It's also about a father. It's about losing things and finding them again. And it's about fishing and dementia, two subjects which I didn't originally, but they had to. Losing it. It comes to something when you're so afraid of mislaying your possessions, you find yourself roping your bed to the floor with a running bowline, and every chair in the room is knotted to a wall with a sheet bend, and you can no longer open your wardrobe door because you've spliced it to the curtains with a round turn and 2 half hitches. There must be a storm coming in, Dad, now that everything in your flat is lashed down. You are, as you tell me, at sea, and I agree. After years twisting nets in fishing ports, you have plaited all the lanyards of your life together here in the secure unit at Wootton Lawn. At last, you're tied down, have nothing left to lose except your mind, to which I'm so attached I keep coming back to hear you list all the things you've lost and whatever else you've forgotten to recall, including the common ground we found in making lists as we slip between unfinished sentences, pass each other spare syllables, are lost for words. And the second poem is it's on a similar, it's a fish theme. It's called Why Men Fish. Now I don't actually have an answer to that question. It's not a question, it's a statement, but I do have some thoughts, mainly based on overhearing things, which perhaps is the only reason that qualifies me to make any pronouncements on it. So here are my thoughts. Why men fish? To wait for the water to twitch, to watch perch, to hold it an art to outwit trout with an artificial fly, to show they know every stage of casting, to indulge in competitive meditation, to hear the sea repeating itself, the tide's lullaby, to step into a still life depicting a triangle of canvas that's but a tabernacle for a flask of tea while fish titillate the lilting river, to sift their thoughts on the shingle beneath the oil refinery's lit city, to miss their beloved who at home is closing a drawer on the smell of carp as if it were a keepsake, to prefer the trawler's yaw, the companionship of cod on a Friday night in November, to catch every other word in the wind and tie it to the line's hypotenuse, at the end of which is fog, to count their blessings in a pool of sunlight, certain that upriver someone else is content to feel tension on the line, as if the fish are trying to get through to tell us that when they die belly upwards and rise to the surface, it is their way of falling.
This is my response to that poem. It might be a little tenuous, but its title is called Like Starfish. In the middle of the night in the yard, my little dog's sniffer discovered a dead mouse. Its pink toes glowed like starfish in the flashlight beam. I steered her clear. She did what she came to do, and we went to bed. This morning, a somber sky, warm June wind, squirrel making its way across the mossy ground like a slinky. Where the mouse had been, I could find only gray stones. What had come and gone and carried off the small, snuffed life? The world is hard as agate, but twice as beautiful. I want to believe there is purpose to being, to seeing, that curiosity is its own gift. Nights when I anticipate lemony moonlight, beguiling starlight, clouds intervene. I try not to want, and I want. There is rapture flowing from my pen as words sink their dark ink into the narrow, bleached pathways of paper. What can be said is a candle flickering against the vastness of all that is unnameable. And this next poem was written after a poet's poem by the same title and on a very similar theme. And that poet was Maya Stein, and it's called Troubleshooting. I haven't found words that will stop a bullet from piercing flesh, or better yet, words that prevent guns from firing in the first place. I reach into my lavender heart that lately fibrillates madly as bodies fall and multiply, young, old, dark bodies, and small bodies too, as blood splashes like an angry Jackson Pollock abstract, and I come up empty, not empty of woe, that overflows like semi-automatics, cartridges firing over and over. Compassion is not a small word, but a large deed. Similarly, empathy, with its lucky 7 letters, which should win out over rifle with its 5, or gun at a mere 3. But this isn't poker or a spelling bee, though the stakes are so high. Blood and bone are the 2 most beautiful words when the breath of life flows through them. Devastating, spoken any other way.
So I'm going to end our reading with 2 short poems. One is from towards the end of Banjo, one of the last poems in Banjo. The Banjo looks at 3 Antarctic expeditions from the turn of the last century. Scott's Discovery Expedition in 1901, his Terra Nova expedition, which was his last expedition, and then Ernest Shackleton's endurance expedition. And this final poem is called Bootlaces, and it's written in the voice of one of Scott's crew members who'd gone out to in search of the 3 missing men, and here's what he found in the tent. Bootlaces. When we soothed out the bamboo poles to blanket their bodies with a tent, next to Scott's face lay traces of a lashing made out of lampwick from his reindeer skin boots, singed at one end, where he'd burned the remaining spirit from the primus as light by which to write his final lines. And then I'm also, I'm going to read a tiny, well, it's not that tiny actually, but a small poem called Conditionals, which is a grammar poem to keep you on your toes. The first conditional is neutral, simple present, tells you the facts. The second is for planning and for dreams, simple past only, please. The third is for regrets or strong advice, and always in the pluperfect tense, for describing hypothetical actions or explanations, recriminations, such as, if only you had tried harder, we might have got together. You use school as an excuse, I concluded. Had I been shrewd, I might have worked it out. You were devoting yourself to cancer of the throat, and by this time next year would no longer be able to speak, let alone teach Greek, or even sit in the olive groves again, where on Tuesday at 11 you have asked to be buried in full sun, or would have if you hadn't had your tongue cut out.
And the last poem I'm going to read is a response to that. It's kind of a language poem, but it's also a love poem, and it has an epigraph. Between living and dreams, there is a third thing. Guess it. Antonio Machado. And my poem is called Wonder. I say the turbid waves today are the color of my grandfather's eyes as he stood at the graveside of his eldest child, green of heartbreak. An anonymous poet says thrush song warbled from within the deodara cedar branches is verse recited by the sun's rays on rainless April days. My little black dog, if she could talk, would say, the soft grass across her paw pads as she runs through the park are multitudes of tiny caresses, so much finer than her peoples give. My best friend Linda says apples taste like every love she's ever known, bursting with enthusiasm at first, but souring as you reach the core. My husband says, the scent of my skin reminds him of his first experience in childhood as a boy of 8, clean and crisp with the tiniest wisp of pine, the wonder of snow. Thank you.
Lana, are you going? I'll remove the spotlights. How about that? Oh, can't figure out how to remove. There we go. We're all back. Please come back to video and give our poets an amazing round of applause for this
Wonderful reading.
wonderful reading. I mean, I feel like I've learned something. I know them better. I can't wait to run out and buy their books, which I will actually put in the post right now, links to where you can get their work. That was awe-inspiring. We could just sit here for a couple more hours and they could keep reading. How about that? No?
I
Okay.
might lose my voice.
Okay. Well, a few more moments together then. I wanted for just some discussion and Q&A. Hope you guys have come up with a few questions. I recently heard Ada Limon speak, and she said that she can trace back her love of poetry or her life of poetry to a couple of stanzas of Wordsworth that were at the beginning of the book Water Babies. And I was just wondering if either of you have a poem like that that changed your life, that led you to poetry or a book of poems.
Yeah, I without doubt, I think straight away to a poem called Delay by the English poet Elizabeth Jennings, who I met in Oxford, and and I didn't know how great she was. I just thought she was a batty old poet. I'm ashamed to say that now, but I did think that at the time, because she used to go around with those bags. I mean, just but her work is incredible. But I knew this poem before then. It's Delay. The radiance of that star that leans on me was shining years ago. The light that glitters now up there, my eye may never see. And so the time lag teases me with how love that loves now may not reach me until its first desire is spent. The star's impulse must wait for eyes to claim it beautiful, and love arrived may find us somewhere else. And that poem has just stayed with me for years and years. I think it's the combination of being here and far away, and light in the darkness, which was an important thing for me at that time. The rhymes that are very delicate, and it's so portable. I mean, I didn't sit down and learn it line by line. I've just loved it for so many years. It stays with me. It's like a little prayer, a little mantra. It pops up in my head at the right moments, and it's a great source of comfort to me. So, and it also reminds me something that she said to me before she died, which was about the importance of form, of writing in form, and that's something that I've tried to do since that moment of meeting her.
Thank you, Samantha. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Lana.
Yeah, what an amazing poem. That was so beautiful. Yeah, I'd like to get that poem and read it again and again. Yeah, my first experience with poetry, I think some of you have heard this before, is probably when I was about 5. We had a donation bag that had come to us in our basement. And at the bottom of the bag of clothing, there were some poetry books and other books. And I don't know why they were there or whether they were even intended for us. But one of the books was a book of poems by Rudyard Kipling. And another, I believe, was Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And I picked up the Rudyard Kipling, and being only 5 years old, I knew how to read. Not well, but I knew how to read because I had this wonderful next door neighbor who was 5 years older than me and came home from school every day and set up a board in her basement and taught me her lessons. So I learned how to read from her. And I might have been at maybe a 7-year-old level at 5, I don't know. But I read the poems of Rudyard Kipling aloud. And although I didn't understand them completely, I could hear a music and a magic that just spoke to me so deeply. And I knew there was something in there for me. There was something special for me. You know, I kind of had a not the happiest childhood, kind of a difficult childhood, I guess. And these poems just spoke to me of other worlds, other lives, other possibilities. And I was hooked, and I went to the public library and bought all the books, and borrowed all the books I could from the poetry shelves. And, but I have to say, the one poem that probably saved my life more than any other poem came later. It was read to me in public school It was an anthology in public school. And I can't remember if it was 5th grade or 6th grade, but it would never be allowed to be read today. Never, ever, ever would that poem be allowed in a public school today in America. And that poem that saved my life, I'll read it to you, was the poem Resume. Trying to get it on my screen, by Dorothy Parker. Resume. Razors pain you, rivers are damp, acids stain you, and drugs cause cramp. Guns aren't lawful, nooses give, gas smells awful, you might as well live. And I think that poem saved my life. I really do.
Thank you, Lana. The power of poetry. Does anybody else have a question?
Me.
Go, Jeff.
Well, listening to the two of you was sort of like watching a string quartet duel with a rock band. What planning went into the poems moving back and forth this way? Because theme and they resonated with each other in such fascinating ways. Did you guys plan this out?
We did plan it, and most of the resonance is really Samantha's part, because I sent her a bunch of poems that I was interested in reading from my collection, and she went through her poems and saw which ones resonated with those. And then I said, well, that's not really fair. Send me some of your poems. But really, she was the matchmaker. And it was fun planning.
That's
I think,
fantastic.
but also, Lana, there's something. I think there's also something slightly organic about it as well, in the sense that because we've been in several attic classes, mainly in Matthews, together, then we've come to understand each other's writing voices, I think, and to appreciate what we're trying to do, sometimes in differing directions and sometimes in overlapping directions. And I as soon as you suggested to me to invited me to be able to read alongside you, I just knew that that there was going to be resonance there, regardless of the themes. I just knew that there's something about your voice which certainly sparks off against mine. So it just seemed to be quite a natural thing to do, actually.
Truly well done. Thank you.
Thank you. And I really wanted to do a call and response with Samantha, because I felt like, even though our styles are very different, that all poetry communicates things that are really essential. And in very different styles, I feel like a lot of the work we do is not saying the same thing, but expressing the same kinds of questions, and looking at the same kinds of emotions and experiences. And although we do it in very different ways, I think we have a commonality of wanting to communicate these things that feel so vital to us.
Yeah, I think that's right. I just noticed there's a question in the chat about could we hear the name of the books that Bootlaces and Time are in? So can I just say that Bootlaces is in this book Banjo, which was published by Picador in 2012, and what's the other poem? Time. Yeah, that's in this anthology, which is called Shared Horizons, and it came out last year, I think, and in Welsh it's called Gorwelion. I mean, I can write that in the chat in a minute.
Thank you, Samantha and Lana. Any other questions from the audience? Samantha, you're working on your next collection. Do you have a theme that you're working with?
I do have a theme. It's basically Dylan Thomas related, in the sense that the poet lived here in New Quay during the war, and he walked around different parts of New Quay every day, because he lived slightly outside New Quay, so he'd have to walk in along the beach. And it was inspired by a story that my grandfather told me about how one day because my grandfather retired when he was 40, and he'd been on sea, I don't know, 30 years or longer, and he was in his garden doing something he was always fixing things. He was fixing something in the garden, and he would see Dylan Thomas going back and forth every day, and for some while the pram or the pusher, the buggy that he was pushing his little girl in, the wheel was broken, and it was annoying my grandfather because it was a strange noise, and so he offered to go out and fix it, and that's when he started talking to the poets. So but there are all sorts of little stories like that, so I've been collecting together all those little stories, and they're slowly forming my next collection.
Thank you. And Lana, do you have themes for your upcoming books, Overtures and Autobiography of Rain?
Overtures is a much less narrative book than the When All Else Fails. It's much more lyrical. It's also autobiographical, because all of my work is. But the Autobiography of Rain is sort of like an amalgam of the two in some ways. It's lyrical and autobiographical, but it's also more philosophical.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Any other questions?
I'm writing down the name of Samantha's poem.
Okay. All right. Well, I know we'd all love to have a small encore from our poets. So would you like to read one last one, Lana, and then Samantha?
Sure, I can do that. So this last poem is the title poem of When All Else Fails. So it's called When All Else Fails. I am here to observe the canvas of sky as light shifts hour by hour. Brightness increases, dampens, revamps, reinvent itself as gilded layers of shadow near dusk. I am here to listen to the strains of rain battering the walls and windows of my house, to the clattering hail like ghosts rattling chains, to the soft mist that whispers in a voice only roots can hear, saying, grow, grow. To the roar of downpour like chorusing poets, Whitman's praise, Neruda's sorrow and amour, Dickinson's mystery. I'm here to stroke the velvet of my little black dog's chin as I'm warmed by her doggy breath, fanned by the metronome of her tail, and to rub that sleek seal-like belly as she poses happily on her back, 4 legs sailing upright. I'm here to taste the salt air of sea, swallow its millennia of ceaselessness, inhale the brine that reminds of our shared ancestry, that long ago creature who clambered from sandy shallows to become a landlubber like me. And failing everything else, I am here for the poetry, for my eyes to embrace its myriad entwined branches of script, for the cold plum so delicious to roll on the tongue, for the tintinnabulation of bells, 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 for the tiger burning bright and leaves of grass, for the strong brown god that is the river, for 2 roads diverging and counting the ways. I'm here to touch the blank page with reverent ink, to lean into the ocean's door ajar, casting my own sad nets as this boat of verse takes on water.
I'm going to end with a poem from Banjo, and it's called Ponting. Herbert Ponting was the photographer on Scott's last expedition. This poem won second prize in the UK National Poetry Competition 10 years ago. Ponting. In the end, we turned him into a verb, to pont, meaning to pose in ice and snow until frozen. On the voyage south, he'd be tilting plates in the darkroom. In one hand, the developing dish, in the other, a basin of vomit. 1 minute, he'd arrange us in groups for the cinematograph, then rush to the ship's side. Once, Ponko roped up his J.A. Prestwich over Terra Nova's bow, balanced on 3 planks. He lost the tip of his tongue when it stuck to the camera at 30 below. Corneas can freeze to peep sight. At 100 degrees of frost, the film's ribbon will split. To pont would also mean pontificate. He'd insist on reeling the film slowly to prevent sparks. We'd rehearse the pole picture, mount the camera on the theodolite tripod, wind twine over the trigger and guide it round a ski stick to get the direction right. He'd instruct us on setting the shutter, how to use a flash in the tent with 1/4 inch of powder and F11. En route to the pole, I sent back negatives with the support teams, a sheet torn from my sledging log detailing exposure data, how composed we were, how cold.
Oh, wow. You guys are just so amazing. Thank you so much for this afternoon here and evening, Samantha. I guess that's it.
Thank you so much. Everyone who's here, just so appreciate your listening presence. And thank you for supporting us both. And thanks to Kitt for hosting this wonderful reading.
Yeah. It was lovely.
You're welcome. Thanks, everyone.
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.